Zambia is the kind of epicenter for the Miombo woodland ecotype, and with that we do share with a lot of the neighbors, Zimbabwe, Malawi, parts of DRC, Angola, but we also do have some very unique species to Zambia, but they tend to be very localized in certain areas. I would encourage anybody that has the interest in indigenous flora to kind of fight for it. It's all too often very easy to just clear an area and put in the development that people want to do without the thought of what is growing there initially. And when we do that, we run the risk of losing so much interesting plant material and the biodiversity that it supports. If we take a bit more time, if we go through an area, we can kind of find those gems that are growing there. We can hopefully nurture them, and even though you might develop an area, it doesn't mean that those things have to be lost fully. My name is Nico Wightman, and I am a botanist and a horticulturist, and I predominantly work on the indigenous flora here in Zambia, documenting but also then collecting and trying to grow it on to see how they could maybe work in trying to create more indigenous gardens in the city. Well, right now here, I have a range of indigenous species that are now starting to come up. So these have been watered, they were watered about a week ago. And with that water, with that onset of water tricking the plants into thinking that it's raining, there has been quite a bit of growth, especially with some of those very early ephemerals that use that opportunity to come up to flower, to make themselves much more visible to the pollinating insects at this time of year, so that they have a much higher chance of being pollinated effectively. One of the brightest we can see obviously here at the moment is this little Tolbagia. This is Tolbagia rhodesica. Sometimes they call these society garlics. A lot of people would be very familiar with the ones that are grown in gardens, in urban spaces, which is the Tolbagia violacea, I think it is, or something like that, which is an evergreen species, whereas this is a deciduous species. So it will grow at this time of year, and then when the rains finish, it will completely go dormant and wait until the next season. But we can contrast something that's showy here to something like this, which is also flowering, but you wouldn't necessarily notice the flowers of this very, very well.
Wow.
This is a Dorstenia. It's in the same family as mulberries and fig trees. This is a family, Moraceae. And the flowers in Moraceae are not typical flowers like we would know. They're on a receptacle and they're generally pretty dull. But then with something like this, the kind of appendages that come off of the receptacle plate are very, very interesting and kind of alien in many ways as well. The importance of our indigenous plants to biodiversity is mainly tied in the fact, that all of these plants and insects and birds and small mammals evolve together, and they have linkages between them that are important. That one, flowers pollinated by a certain insect are then integral to the propagation maybe of that insect species. That insect species then might support insectivorous birds and small mammals that then rely on that as a food source. A lot of plants, actually, there's quite a few plants that we have where the seed dispersal is linked to specific types of animals or invertebrates as well, especially with things like ant seed dispersal, which is a really interesting and important one as well. And so they kind of provide some of the lower rungs of the food chain going upwards and supporting all these different invertebrates and insects, supports other levels going up forward. In addition, some plants are medicinal, and beyond just humans, there will be other animals and things like that that also use them as well. So it is important, especially as we transition and areas become much more urbanized, we have a possibility of losing some of this biodiversity if we don't have specific flowers or plants that certain insect groups rely on, essentially. We have something like this little ginger. Now, unfortunately, this ginger, its name is Siphonochylis longitudus. It is now, the petals are now shrinking and shriveling up because this is a night blooming species. So the Siphonochylis is pollinated by hawk moths. They play a very important role with pollination at this time of year, as there are quite a few night flowering tubular flowers that will attract them in to help feed them during this period when they are emerging and a lot of the plants are emerging. So we've got the Siphonochylis here. There is crinum species are all pollinated by hawk moths. We've got Ammocharis tiniana, which is also night flowering and pollinated by hawk moths. There's even members in the Rubiaceae family and the Iridaceae family that all have white night flowering plants, or flowers, sorry, that rely on hawk moths for that pollination. And then that in turn, the hawk moth relies on for food sources as it's emerging to get that energy to allow it to also then further procreate. So the intricacies of the relationships between plants and, in this case, an invertebrate species is very, very special. But if white night flowering species are not then in an area, your chances of losing those hawk moths increase dramatically. So in here, rather than growing them in pots or in plastics, I've been growing this stuff in the ground as a bit more of a permanent way of growing them, so that I can collect seed. I can then have the material be able to grow and develop so that I can maintain what I have and then increase the numbers that I have. So these are more permanent plantings for that.
I mean, some of these are fantastic. I'm just looking at this, the leaf shape and design here. What is this?
This is actually an endemic aloe. I think it's probably still an endemic.
What does the word endemic mean?
Endemic means that it would only exist either in a specific location, and that might be a habitat, or more commonly we use it to refer to it growing in only one single country. Okay. So most of the time, because of the way that things go, most plants will be more widespread than just a single habitat, or that habitat is much more broad, so things can spread across borders, although obviously plants don't know borders. But in this case, this aloe, I think, is still only known from parts of western Zambia, northwestern Zambia, sorry. This is Aloe fimbrialis. It is what they call a grass aloe, even though the leaves do not look like grass, but that's just mainly because it's deciduous. So in the dry season, the leaves will shrivel, it will retreat below ground as a little kind of bulby-like storage area, and then in the warm season, it will start to come up, and it'll generally first put up its flowers, and then after rain and water has arrived, then it will unfurl the leaves, which are quite actually ornamental in that way that they lie flat along the ground, and I love that kind of purplish edge to them as well.
Beautiful.
And then if you look close at the edge, there's all these little hairs on the edge, and this is what gives the name Aloe fimbrialis. It's got a fimbriate edge to or margin to the leaf. Let me bring your attention to another interesting and generally easily overlooked little species. So right here, this doesn't look like much and would be generally hard for people to easily spot on the woodland floor as if they're walking through. But this is actually a member of the same family as the passion fruit. This is Adenia ovata in Passifloraceae. And again, this thing flowers right at ground level, so there'd be some level of insect, probably something that is generally flightless, that would most likely be involved in the pollination of these. And then growing not too far from it, just by you, we've got another small species of Adenia. This is Adenia goatsii, which likewise has a very kind of short habit, but its flowers and leaves are produced on a very small stalk. So this stalk won't get much bigger than that, whereas this one here is always at ground level, effectively. The leaves will spread out along the ground as they mature, and the fruits here, you can see them developing, will basically stay at ground level. And I did mention about ants being an important seed dispersal species.
We can actually see an ant here.
Well, they're probably also in the flowers looking for nectar and trying to get what they can from it. But these at the moment, once those seeds or pods are ripened and they pop open, the fruit, sorry, they're covered in this kind of sticky, very tight substance around, and the ants will take that to eat it. And usually they'll bring those seeds to other areas. They might even bring them down into their colonies, and in there those can germinate and then grow a new plant effectively. But when we contrast this to the well-grown passion fruit species here in Zambia, they're not very similar looking.
Different.
Most people wouldn't even realize. But this supports a vastly different array of insect species than what passion flowers will then support in terms of what we've imported and growing in the garden.
How can this and passion fruit be in the same family?
You'd have to look at the flower, the finer details of the flower. The flower is a little too small for me to open it up and show you in there, but the same structures that would be in the passion fruit family, or the passion fruit flower, Passiflora, will also occur in this, essentially. So in terms of trying to understand plants and how they're related, a lot of taxonomists have to go based on the flowers. It's not the only characteristic, but the flowers play a major role in helping people to identify which belongs where. So here we actually have 4 different things that are in flower from 4 different families. One of the first and usually the most interesting to many people, we have one of our indigenous orchid species here. This is Eulofia gaunichyla. Again, these will usually come up before the onset of the rains. There's something obviously in the weather that changes that triggers them into flowering. Unfortunately, this one's just about finished. It's dropped quite a few of its flowers and doesn't look like it will be pollinated. Obviously, the pollination mechanisms for orchids are quite varied and different across the board. But usually these might have 1 or 2 pods that are pollinated every year. And orchids, as we know, have tens of thousands to sometimes hundreds of thousands seeds per seed pod. So these can spread quite a bit in the right conditions effectively. And it's a very common one found throughout Zambia and surrounding countries. Quite beautiful in the shapes of the flower and in the coloring that this one has as well. There is always going to be something in flower in season, and sometimes that is an annual species that has been able to maintain flowering well into the dry season. But once we hit past usually August, September, what we generally tend to find, it's perennial species that will come up at that point in time and be some of the earliest flowering. Like, I've got things in the garden that will come up in August and start their flowering, even though rains are probably 2 to 3 months away. So there is always something that we can find, and these are not, oh, it's all in the same family. These species run across different families. So that strategy, though not a hugely popular one, is out there to feed insects, to feed other organisms while it's a difficult time of year, so to speak. So then we have something in the cucumber family, Cucurbitaceae. This is a bit of an alien looking flower here. This is Trochomeria macrocarpa. This is a male plant. There is no ovary at the base of the flower. So with Trochomeria, you have male plants and you have female plants. They don't have on the same plant. So there'd have to be a female plant around somewhere for this to pollinate in order for seeds and the progression of the species. And again, you can see this will have a bit of a long tube by most insect standards. So this would have to have some kind of fly or something with a long proboscis that's going to be able to get into that. And then finally, just in front of you, we have a member of the milkweed family. This is a Raffianacme. I'd have to look it up again, but this might be Raffianacme globosum. And again, most people walking in the bush, you'd see this and you wouldn't think very much of it, but it is actually in flower, in that if you look very close up, you can see these absolutely tiny yellowish green flowers here. And like the Orchidaceae family, the Apocynaceae family, especially certain members of the Apocynaceae family, have very intricate pollination mechanisms requiring insects to, usually it's with their feet as they're marching around the flower, to place a foot in a specific area that will then pick up the pollen. So pollinia in the same way that orchids have pollinia, and then move to a different plant and put that foot in another hole in such a way where that pollen can then pollinate the flower on a different plant. But the size of the plant belies what lies underneath, because the actual tuberous structure of this plant is almost 30 centimeters across. So it's a bit of a mismatch, from what you see above ground to what would be below ground to support this effectively. So very much like the purple Tolbagia that we saw, Tolbagia rhodesica, we have another little early flowering Tolbagia here. This is Tolbagia cameroonii. This has white flowers with varying degrees of yellowish coloring to the corona of the flower, and the corona is this little kind of central point in the middle that looks a little bit like a crown, hence the name corona. This is a very interesting species in that these flowers are actually night fragrant. If you come out at night, or if you take these as cut flowers, because I actually now really like taking these as cut flowers and bringing them into the house, it has a beautiful kind of almost jasmine-esque scent to it, which would probably be an indication that it is attracting some level of moth for its pollination. We have what most people recognize as kind of the star of the early season flora. This is one of our fireball lilies. This is Scaduxus multiflorus. This is an amazing plant. This is an absolute stunner when it is in flower like this. You can see kind of size differences in the actual size of the inflorescence. It isn't an indication that that is the size that it will always be. They can flower from a younger age, and hence you get generally a smaller inflorescence with fewer flowers, to getting something that can be larger, and in some cases I've seen them almost approaching 30 centimeters across in terms of the size of the inflorescence here. They have a kind of a progression of color. We can see this one is a little bit more pink. It's slightly older than some of these that are reddish, but we're usually talking about this kind of bright red flower, easily seen from a distance in our dry landscape, and just an absolute fabulous plant. I have a few different collections of this from around the country, some that come up and flower very early like this is, others that might be a little bit more delayed and then flower together with the leaves that are emerging. So with something like this, I'm not actually fully sure what pollinates them. I've seen butterflies on it, I've seen bees coming on them. Right now, this has got its pollen completely out at the moment, and as I spread my hand across it, you can just see the yellow of that has come up. So I mentioned a little bit earlier about the white flowering night flowering white flowers. This is one of them, although these actually now look pink. So when the flowers first open, they are white. They have a nice kind of light scent to them, and that will attract in the hawk moths. By the next morning, these flowers will have faded from white to this kind of light pink. And then after another day, they will fade to a slightly darker shade of pink before completely withering and being done for the year. This is an absolutely stunning plant, a bulbous plant related to the Scidoxis. This is Ammocharis tiniana, sometimes referred to as the sand lily because it tends to grow in sandy plains. But it can also be found in woodlands. We've got the corolla tube on this, which has got to be about 10 centimeters long, if not slightly more, maybe even 15 centimeters long. And in order to pollinate that, you're going to have a hawk moth whose tongue can reach all the way down to where the nectar is going to be. And in the process, it will knock up against the stamens and then the stigma here when it travels to the next plant and pollinate this. So if hawk moths disappear from an area, things like this Ammocharis will no longer have the pollinators around, and over time a species might be lost from an area because if it isn't able to procreate and establish the new generations, as the plant ages, it might eventually finally die out and nothing is there to replace it. So if we change areas too much or we just completely remove all of the indigenous vegetation, we don't just lose the vegetation, we also lose quite a bit of the wildlife that the vegetation does support as well. Here we have a collection of some of the stemless spiral gingers. So this is Costus spectabilis. Costus is generally the genus for the spiral gingers, where they produce their stem and that stem kind of spirals up. But this is a species that doesn't have a stem that rises above ground. But at this time of year, it comes up with these little yellowish trumpet flowers. And these can be quite varied as well. This is a collection I made that has these kind of very light yellow, lemon yellowy flowers. They can range all the way to almost quite a dark orangey yellow. And then get the name the golden trumpet lily because of that kind of orangey yellow color. So here I've got quite a few plants that are growing in pots, and usually these are material that I've recently collected and I'm growing on just to make sure that it has established and I can grow it in the nursery before I might transition it to something like the raised beds over there to allow it to really establish and bring up eventually to produce seeds for myself. And here we have another Eulophia orchid species. This is most likely Eulophia speciosa, but it doesn't look like most speciosa does. I don't expect it to be anything other than speciosa. But even at that, I've collected it because it's a different representation of how the flowers can appear on something like this genus as well. Then just in front of me here, we have this fantastic little purple flowered species. This is Raffianacme Michelii. This grows mostly in Kalahari sand areas, so it's mostly Western Province, Northwestern Province, southern parts of DRC. And this is one that I'm really hoping to be able to propagate, get seed of and propagate and introduce more into cultivation because it's such a beautiful, beautiful plant. But Raffianacme is hard to pollinate, so unfortunately I've not been able to see any seed pods developing on this at all in the last year. So just hoping that eventually we will find something that will be able to pollinate this and make it easy for us to produce seed. I'm doing some of these, trying to introduce these things into cultivation, because a lot of times the habitats of some of these plants are being threatened by the expansion of agriculture, predominantly by the expansion of agriculture, and to some other levels, development. And with some of these, especially, if we lose them from an area, their chances of re-establishing in that area are very low because they don't produce lots of seed. This euphorbia here might produce maybe upwards of 10 seeds in a year, and that would be on a very vigorous plant. They are not very productive in terms of that seed production. They rely on that environment being stable and being healthy for them to be able to survive in it. And the minute we introduce more disturbance into it, we threaten species like that. I'm going to kind of end this on the note right here of looking at this Eulophia orchid species. And this is why I do my botanical work. This is Eulophia herreraensis. And up until I collected this plant, this species has not been ever collected in Zambia. So I made this collection of this plant several years ago, again out in the western part of the country. And now with this collection, I will preserve these flowers. When I initially collected the plant, most of the flowers were eaten and damaged. So I collected it, I brought it back to the nursery, and now it's flowering properly for the first time. I can preserve these flowers, I will provide them to my colleague, and we will at least establish that this species now exists in Zambia. Previously it was known mostly from Angola, Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, and I think South Africa. Now we can include Zambia on the list of countries that this species exists in. So the botanical work that I do is not just to grow pretty things or grow interesting things. I'm also looking at trying to establish what species are in Zambia, where they are in Zambia, and then if need be, we need to assess kind of what any threats to the habitat are. And something like this, where this is now the first and only known collection in Zambia for this species, is something that I'm really keen on, passionate about doing, because we can't protect what we don't know is there, and we need to make sure that we know what is there in order to then make sure that we're not losing anything. So with this, I will take these flowers for documentation. I will maintain this plant so that we can at least ensure that the original collection that I made continues to survive, and hopefully more will be found. But until that time, at least we've got one record for here in Zambia. We can still preserve a lot of our indigenous flora in other ways. As I say, it can be grown in an area that is not going to be developed, in a little corner of the yard that we just kind of leave more natural. It can be grown in such a way where you, even like I have done, put up some raised beds that are then also left during the dry season to go dry and be dormant. The main thing that we need to do is just acknowledge that there is a wealth of plants out there. Not everything is easy to grow, not everything is ornamental, but that doesn't make a difference in terms of the importance of those species in the web of connections that exists within the ecology here in Zambia. So I just encourage people to take the time to examine what is there, document it, and that can easily be done through something like iNaturalist, where pictures can be taken when things are in growth or in flower, posted to the iNaturalist site so that others can help identify. There have been quite a few things across the world that have either turned out to be new and or interesting for an area just because somebody took the time to take those pictures and post them. So I would encourage people to take a little bit more of an interest in what's happening in the so-called wild areas, because sometimes you will find absolute gems in those spaces.